All right, very good morning to everyone this morning. If you want to open your Bibles to the book of Leviticus, that's where we're going to be today. If you'll open up to Leviticus chapter 11, that's where we will begin. Looks like our projector may have died on us. We have tried now multiple days to get it. Pete says, good, it's about time. So we're not going to have all the fancy charts and everything that I typically have, so I'll just be explaining things to you instead of having the charts and stuff, but it's easy enough to follow along. So we've been studying the book of Leviticus, and as we have called it, it is the gospel in the Old Testament because there's so many parallels to the things that we see in the book of Leviticus that parallel with the gospel account of Jesus Christ. There's so many things that God is teaching us, teaching Israel in the beginning, but now us through those blood sacrifices, holiness, and so forth. And the entire book of Leviticus is about how sinful man can approach a holy God. So chapters 1 through 5 dealt with the sacrifices. And so we now have this tabernacle. We have this place of worship. What do we do with this place of worship? And so God explains the different types of sacrifices. 5 different sacrifices that are available. Dennis, can you do me a small favor? Would you turn off the TV, please? Thank you. So you have these sacrifices, and then you have chapters 8 through 10. It talks about the priests and the ones who are going to be giving those sacrifices for people. Through 15, and we're now going to deal with the individual. So we had sacrifices for the tabernacle, those who will facilitate the sacrifices. Now God turns his attention to the individual, to the common people, to the regular people, the common folk. And what can they do to consecrate themselves? What can they do to be holy, to be able to approach a holy God? And so it answers a lot of questions. And the first question that is answered, and it is probably the most common thing among all peoples all around the world, no matter where you go. For example, Andrea and I have had the opportunity to travel considerably in different parts of the world. So when we go to South America, when we go to Europe, or whenever we went over to Israel, the first thing that most people want to know or that have in common, when you think about human beings have in common is food. So the question is, what is God's people supposed to eat or not eat? So first thing God does is give us laws for food. So in Leviticus chapter 11, now the Lord spoke to Moses, verse 1, and Aaron, saying to them, speak to the children of Israel, saying, these are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. So he immediately goes right into, these are the type of foods that you can eat. And the first thing that he touches on is meat, talking about the type of animals that you're allowed to eat. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat. All right, he doesn't go into detail about what those animals are, but what kind of animals chew the cud and also have cloven hooves that are common to eat? Cows, all right? Cows are very common. So for millennia, mankind has eaten cattle. What other kind of animal chews the cud and has cloven feet? Sheep. We eat lamb, right? We eat sheep and lambs. What about goats? Same thing, right? We eat goats, as well as deer. We eat deer and antelope. Those are all animals that fall into that category. Common animals that mankind has eaten for years. But then he makes a separation. In the next verse, verse 4, nevertheless, you shall not eat among those that chew the cud or those that have cloven hooves. And we now are going to be given some specifics of what kind of animals. Number one, the camel, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, it is unclean to you. The rock hyrax, same reason. The hare, same reason. The swine, therefore, though it divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. Their flesh you shall not eat, their carcasses you shall not touch, they are unclean to you. All right. So these are, number one, you need to understand these laws are being given to whom? The Jews. To the Israelites. These are not laws that are being given in this time frame. Whenever God was giving these laws, these are not laws that were given to mankind in general. These are not laws that all of mankind is supposed to follow. These laws are being given specifically to the Jews. And does anybody know the reason why?
That they be pure.
That they be pure. That's correct. What else? There you go. There's the word, separate. Jump with me to verse 47. We'll come back to verse 4 and 5 and everything in just a moment. Jump with me to verse 47. Really, we're going to back up to verse 44. Here's the whole reason for this entire chapter. So as you read through this chapter and all of the chapters that remain, it all comes down to these verses. For I am the Lord your God. Number one, God identifies himself as the one who is able to give laws. He is the creator. This is his creation. This is also his people that he has chosen. So he identifies himself as the one, the authority, who makes the laws. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves. What does the word consecrate mean? Holy, all right. What does holy and consecrate mean? What's a way we can define that? Set aside. There you go. To separate, to set aside. So he says, you shall consecrate or set aside yourselves, separate yourselves, that you shall be holy. Those are synonyms. For I am holy. Is there something unique, special about God? Do this. Yes, very. So if you want to approach a holy God, someone who is special and unique, you need to make some changes. You need to be holy. You need to be consecrated. So one of the ways you do that, as he continues in verse 44, neither shall you defile yourself. See, there's the opposite of holy. With any creeping thing that creeps on the earth, for I am the Lord who brings you up out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. So he is making a difference. He is showing there is a difference between my people and your people. Go with me real quick to Exodus chapter 8, verse 23. Keep your finger in Leviticus, but go with me to Exodus chapter 8. When we get to Exodus chapter 8, we are in the time frame of whenever Moses is performing these miracles. God is sending Moses to Pharaoh to tell Pharaoh to let his people go, and right in the middle of all these plagues. And I want you to notice what God says, or what is being said in Exodus chapter 8, verse 23. He says, I will make a difference between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall be. And this is the plague of the flies. All right? And this happens a few different times. Whenever this plague is sent to the Egyptians, and they suffer from this plague, but God makes a difference between them and his people who are in the land of Goshen. So he's showing there's something different about these people. Go back with me now to Leviticus. That's the point here. He's making a difference. Were there cultures, were there people in that day and age who did eat, say, the camel or ate these other animals and stuff? Yes. Are there cultures today that eat animals that we don't eat? I see Jan shaking her head. If you've ever been to Nigeria or any of those other places, you would be amazed at the kind of foods that are being sold in the market. You would be disgusted also. Paul, you had a comment.
Yeah, here's, starting in verse 41, it says a number of times about not eating things that swarm.
Yeah.
ESV and the Holman, Christian Standard, all say creatures that swarm being forbidden. Locusts swarm.
Well, we haven't got there yet. You're getting ahead of me. I'm just trying to set up so we understand as we read through this, we'll see a few more things. But hold on to your thought, and when I get there, go, and it's now your time again.
I'll take it back, put on pause.
All right. Now, going back to swine, okay? So here's an interesting thing about swine and pigs, or pigs are swine, is that they use a word. This is where the beginning of this word comes about, and it's still used today in the Jewish community. It is the word unkosher. Things that are kosher and things that are unkosher. The swine is considered probably the most abominable animal in all of Judaism, even in other religions, for example, also in Islam. And so the swine is the most offensive, and it is unkosher, which means not fit. It is not proper. And so that which is kosher is acceptable. It is proper. It is fit for consumption, whereas things like swine and some others that we'll see here are not. It's interesting also that these laws that we're going to see happens in multiple different ways, these laws that God has given are also going to be sanitary. They help in things like health. Because what do we know about swine when it comes to sanitary? They are very unsanitary. They are susceptible to all kinds of parasites, worms, and things like that. If you don't prepare the meat properly, you can get all kinds of disease and sickness that comes from that. After all, pigs are some of the most cleanest and pristine animals on the planet, right? Yeah, they're disgusting animals, aren't they? They eat anything, and mud and filth. And so not only is God making a separation by these different animals, but He's also inserting or emphasizing cleanliness and good health. All right, so a lot of things that are happening here with this. Now He continues. Not only do you have these animals, let's now move into the next category, which is verses 9 through 12, and that is talking about the fish. He says, you may eat all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether it is the seas or the rivers, you may eat. There's your key thing. Fins and scales. He goes on to say, but of the seas and rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water, any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. What's something, all right, I'm going to get a little personal here. What's something that we eat a lot of in this part of the country that does not have fins and scales? Catfish. No catfish for any Israelite. All right, so isn't that interesting? There's also something else that has no fins and scales that we eat a lot of around here. Shellfish. That's right. So shrimp, lobsters, oysters, all of those things are things that the Israelites did not eat. They were not allowed to eat. All right? So God is making a distinction. He goes on. Now we get into verse 13 rather. Now he starts to talk about birds. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. You shall not eat the eagle, the vulture. How many of y'all have vulture for Thanksgiving? All right? No. I mean, an eagle, you think, that's interesting, but then he clarifies it because they're in the same family. They're raptors, right? So the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, the falcon, the raven, the ostrich. I find that fascinating because I remember back when I was a kid, somebody came through our part of the country and there was an ostrich salesman. And next thing you know, everybody had ostrich farms because they were going to make all this money on the leather that you could make from them, the eggs that you could sell, the meat, the feathers, and none of that panned out. But anyway, the short-eared owl, the seagull, the hawk, the little owl, the fisher owl, the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw. Who knows what a jackdaw is? Okay, I don't either. I was just wondering if anybody knew. The carrion vulture, the stork, the heron and its kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. All right, so all these different types of birds that you shall not eat. Now, he doesn't go into ones that you can eat. What are some that we know we can eat? In fact, God sent them to the Israelites in Numbers chapter 11. There you go. Quail, dove. All right, what does everything taste like? Chicken. And so forth. All right, back to you, Jared.
What was the bird you were asking about? Was that verse 17?
Which one, brother?
The jackdaw?
Yes, the jackdaw.
New American Standard says cormorant.
The cormorant.
Fishing bird.
There you go. Those are an interesting bird, dive into the water. A cormorant. I didn't know that's a jackdaw. Okay. So next time I see a cormorant, I'm going to go, hey, look at that jackdaw. All right, now we get into Paul's favorite section. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. But he goes on to eat, verse 22. He says, these you can eat. Do you want to elaborate there, Paul?
Any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, and grasshopper.
Love me some chocolate-covered grasshopper, right?
It seems weird to me because locusts swarm, but he makes an exception here, which is how John the Baptist
Oh, good point.
subsisted on locusts.
Locusts and honey. That's right. That's right. Locusts and honey. He says, but all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. All right. So believe it or not, locusts and grasshoppers actually are a very good source of food. And there's a lot of countries, including South America and Israel and others that still eat grasshoppers and crickets and stuff today. Any questions, thoughts, comments up to this point? Yes.
When I was a Boy Scout, we used to deep fry grasshoppers.
Really? All right. Eat them like popcorn. Okay. All right. Now, the question might be, well, what makes something clean and unclean? I mean, you're making this difference between the two, but okay, what more is there about this idea of being clean and unclean? Well, he now answers that question beginning in verse 24. He says, but these things shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean till the evening. Now just stop and think about that for just a second. Dead animals, all right? And you go to handle the carcass or the skin or whatever it is of a dead animal. Is there any danger or problem with that?
Bacteria.
There you go. So now you're dealing with hygiene, talking about bacteria. There's a lot of danger that comes from dead animals. I remember one time we were going to, whenever I was younger, my dad was preaching a gospel meeting. And a lot of times, on Sundays, if we'd go somewhere, we would wind up going home with one of the members and have dinner with them. And so we were going to this brother's house, and he said, just follow me and I'll show you the way. And so as we're driving, we go to turn, and he stops. And he opens his door and he looks back at us and he points to the road, and there was roadkill right there. And he goes, lunch. So we don't eat roadkill, do we? At least we shouldn't. We don't handle it. We don't touch it. It's dangerous. And so he now gives a lot of different laws and rules. Whoever carries part of a carcass, if any of them, shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. All right, so you're going to see this over and over. If this happens, you need to wash, and then you'll be unclean until the evening. So there's a cleansing element that is added to it and a time element that is added to it. Doesn't that make sense? Isn't that what we do today? We clean something and then we give it time. We isolate it for a while, because that way the bacteria will die, or it has been washed off, or we're taking care of it. All right. He goes on to say, and whatever goes on its paws, verse 27, among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, they are unclean to you. What kind of animals go on the paw? Dogs, cats, bears. There you go. Yeah.
So I'm seeing one big distinction between all of these animals, and most of the ones that are unclean are meat eaters.
There you go.
They carry trichinosis.
Trichinosis. There you go. That's a great point, Jared. In fact, this is one of the things as you're considering when you're talking about what God is doing here, is that these animals that are making the distinction are falling in about 3 different categories. One of the categories is that they are meat eaters. In other words, they're carnivores. There's blood involved. What does God say about eating blood? Don't do it, because life of the flesh is in the blood. And so it has to do with an association with death. The second category that they fall in, and you'll notice a lot of these animals, are scavengers. Right? What do scavengers eat? Death. Isn't it interesting that we've got these ones that have to do with death? And then there is one other category. I have it written down here. Where did I put it? So you have those that kill, those that are scavengers, and then poisonous. The other one is the ones that are poisonous, because you don't want to eat something that will kill you because it's poisonous. For example, blowfish. That's a delicacy over in Japan, but they have to prepare it specifically in a specific way, or it'll kill you because it's got poison in it. I don't know why you want to do that, but anyway. So here, great distinction that you notice there. He goes on to talk about more creeping things. Verse 29, you shall not eat the mole or the mouse or the large lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. It's interesting. God specifically says, thou shalt not eat these things. We almost need those kind of laws today, because we've got kids eating Tide Pods, right? We need to have some laws. Thou shalt not eat these things. Well, God is laying that out. Who would ever think of eating, a mole or a lizard or something? Well, apparently somebody did, right?
If you get hungry enough, you'll eat anything.
There you go. So God is making a distinction. Apparently the pagans, the other people, they would eat these things. And so this is showing a stark distinction between the two. Now he goes on in verse 32, and not only if you touch something that is unclean, but even if your clothes or the kitchen things that you use. For example, think about this. If a mouse or a rat were to go across your kitchenware, especially in this case, he's talking about an earthen vessel, stone pottery and stuff, he says you need to destroy it. Why is that? Because they carry disease. Right? Now think about this. What happened, I believe it was in the 1400s? What? The bubonic plague, the black plague, Black Death. What was that all about? What was the root cause of that massive disease that killed off millions of people in Europe? Sanitation, rats, the very things that we're talking about right here. You know what's interesting? History doesn't talk about this much, but you know the people who survived the bubonic plague that had no issues? The Jews. Because they were still following these dietary laws and these hygienic laws and everything. In fact, there were a time whenever the Europeans were blaming the Jews for the bubonic plague, thinking they're the ones who started it. But all they were doing was following these dietary laws, and therefore they weren't being affected by that Black Death. An interesting piece of history. All right. So he goes on and he continues talking about what you shall eat and what you shall not eat. So a lot of this has to do with a key element of what God desires in his people. It's not really so much about what you eat and what you don't eat as it is that you what? Starts with the letter O. Obey. There you go. It's about obedience. If you follow these rules and laws, which are no different than the rules and laws and commandments he gives in the first 5 chapters of those sacrifices, and then the rules and laws he gives to the next chapters with the priest. Now he's talking about the individual. What's he expecting you to do? Obey. This is what you can eat. This is what you can't eat. It is more about that than it is about the actual animal. And these things wind up changing, of course, when? When Jesus came, and we see that in passages like, for example, Acts chapter 10. What did God say to Peter? Rise, kill, and eat. Do not call unclean what I have clean. And then, of course, Paul addresses all of this in Romans chapter 14. He goes on in Colossians chapter 2, as well as in 1 Timothy 4, 1 through 5, where these laws do not apply to Christians anymore. Because can we eat pork? You know, we even eat pork rinds, which God says specifically don't eat the skin of the swine. Yes, John?
In all things that God tells us there's a wisdom that he's saving us from doing something or being a negative.
That's right.
He's also giving some positive. And one thing that's altogether about those animals that he points out is that those are what's called ruminant animals.
What?
Ruminant.
Okay.
Now, ruminant animals are the ones that have the multi-chamber stomachs.
Uh-huh.
And they actually do a better job of converting nitrogen and amino acids into proteins than do the other ones. So you actually get a better food and a better protein out of those animals, which is a blessing to eat those, and not only just averting the curse.
Wow. Fascinating. That's awesome. You think God knows what he's doing? God is the creator. Does he know what's best for man? That's right. All right, so those are your laws about eatings. Now we get into chapter 12, and he moves into another aspect of the common peoples and things, and he answers the question about what about a woman when she gives birth? Now we're not going to go into a lot of detail, but I think most adults understand what happens at birth. There's a lot of things that happen hygienically, okay? And so he's answering the question, saying, verse 2, speak to the children of Israel. If a woman has conceived and born a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. As in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. Now he goes on and he says, if she has a female child, verse 5, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks in her customary impurity, and she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. Now, there's a couple of things that are going on here, and the one distinction is between a male and a female is verse 3. Whenever he says, on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Now, this is not a new law. This is a continuation of the covenant that he gave to who? Who? Yeah, I heard A and then Ham over here. Abraham, right? He gave this covenant to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 17. And then we see it continued in other passages, but here now it is formally put in the law, if you will, the Mosaic law. And it says that they are circumcised when? When? Why 8? Why not 4? Why not immediately? Or why not when they're 1 year old? There we go. Vitamin K naturally peaks in the human body only at this time, 8 days after birth. What is vitamin K good for? Blood clotting. It's the perfect time to do this. Now, there's a lot of symbolism that goes along with circumcision. Paul talks about it a lot and how that applies to us, but it comes back to this. And so you can see one more connection between the gospel and here. All right. This answers the questions of what the woman should do about childbirth. So after she has gone through that purification process, or that time in her blood, as it says, when the days of her purification are fulfilled, verse 6, whether for a son or daughter, she shall bring to the priest a lamb of the first year as a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Now you're going to see this happen over and over throughout the book of Leviticus. Whenever something needs to be cleansed, to be restored, to be brought back, to be able to, what the whole book is about, approach a holy God, it involves sacrifice. So here he has said that the woman who gives birth is going to be impure, primarily because the blood that's involved. And so he's saying once she goes through that purification process, then she needs to be able to approach God again. That requires cleansing and sacrifice. Keep that in mind. All right. Any questions before we move on to the next chapter? Because with that in mind, in the next chapter, chapter 13, we start now with the laws concerning leprosy. And you're going to notice that you have not only chapter 13, but chapter 13 and chapter 14 that are dealing with this, and really chapter 15 too, which goes into a little bit more gross details. But in chapter 13, he begins his saying, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore, then he shall be brought to Aaron, the priest, or to one of the sons of the priests. So we're dealing with leprosy here, and we're going to get into more detail in just a second. But I want you to notice the first thing, the first part of the law. They shall be brought where? To Aaron or one of the sons of the priests. The priests, not to the doctor, not to a hospital, not to anywhere else, to the priest. Isn't that fascinating? And notice what he says in verse 3. The priest shall examine the sore on the skin of the body, and if the hair on the sore has turned white, and the sore appears, and he goes on to talk. It's interesting. It's the job of the priest to be the national health inspector. You ever thought about that? Isn't that fascinating? God gives another job to his holy priest, to the priest of the Levitical priesthood, not only to handle all these sacrifices and deal with all the things that have to do with worship, but they're also to be health inspectors. And so from this verse forward, you wind up with all of these sections. So there's different types and aspects to leprosy. Who can tell me some things about leprosy? What do we know about leprosy? We've talked about it many times. Many different classes have talked about aspects of leprosy.
It must be contagious.
Must be contagious. All right.
It's the slowest growing bacteria in the world.
Slowest growing bacteria in the world. So it's contagious, slowest growing bacteria. What else do we know? What? You don't want it. Painful. It is an absolutely horrible disease. Now, in this modern day and age, we don't really have much interaction with leprosy, but in that day and age, leprosy was a horrible disease. It was widespread. Leprosy is slow-growing bacteria that begins in many different ways, and he's going to talk about all these spots, or the hair that falls out, or the things under the skin, and various aspects of how it can start. And what winds up happening is it winds up consuming the whole body. It begins with fingernails falling off. The nose, for example, will deteriorate where it's completely gone. The body just starts eating itself, and essentially what leprosy does is it destroys the individual. You die of this if you can't be cured. And so the priests are given all these instructions of how to diagnose these issues. So, for example, notice that he mentions that about this possible leprous sore, and he goes on verse 4, if the bright spot is white on the skin, does not appear to be deeper than the skin, if the hair is not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore 7 days. And he goes on, he says, then once you've done that, you bring them out, and if you don't see any change, you isolate them another 7 days. And then he goes on, in verse 6, he shall examine him again on the 7th day, and indeed if the sore has faded, the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. Are there diseases that wind up with spots on the skin that after 14 days or so they go away? Measles. There you go. Measles and chicken pox and some other things like that after, and what do we do? What do we do whenever we have somebody that has measles? If somebody were to walk into the auditorium or walk into the church building and go, hey, y'all, I've got chicken pox, come and give you a hug. Or I've got measles, come give me a hug. What are you going to do? And so what is God telling the priest to do? Quarantine, isolate. Do you know history is showing that Levitical priests are some of the first ones to actually isolate people for disease? I find that fascinating. So you isolate them, then he says, you shall pronounce them clean. So there's a distinction being made between these skin spots that are just some other type of disease and leprosy. Because now notice what he says. But, verse 7, if the scab should at all spread over the skin, after he has been seen by the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. And if the priest sees that the scab has indeed spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is, what does your Bible say? Leprosy. Now what's fascinating about this word here, he uses this word leprosy. It's actually a more general term than what we would use for the word leprosy, because this word could actually include things like psoriasis. It could include other things like, for example, ringworm. But then it also includes what our modern day term is, and Joe, tell me if this is right, Hansen's disease. Is that correct? That's the modern day term for leprosy, Hansen's disease. So it can include all of those things. All right? So then he says, they shall be unclean. He goes on, jump down to verse 12. And if leprosy breaks out all over the skin, the leprosy covers all the skin, the one who has a sore from his head to his foot, whenever the priest looks, and the priest shall consider, indeed, if the leprosy has covered all of his body, he shall pronounce him clean who has the sore. If it all turn white, he is clean. So even then, it's possible that the leprosy could go away and he could be pronounced clean. So leprosy is dealt with very seriously. That's just the beginning. The whole rest of the chapter, he gives all kinds of different things. For example, verse 14, raw flesh appears on him and appears unclean. Verse 15, it's leprosy. He goes down, verse 20, if the priest sees it and indeed it appears deeper in the skin and its hair turns white, it is a leprous sore. He goes on in the next section, verse 21, talking about a bright spot, but he makes a distinction. In verse 23, if the bright spot stays in one place and does not spread, it is the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. And so over and over you see this. Verse 24, if he receives a burn. Well, if it goes deeper and it spreads, it's leprosy. If it heals, it's not leprosy. Verse 30, again, if it has yellow hair, pronounce him unclean, a scaly leprosy from the head or the beard. And again, he has some other verses in verse 32, 33, and 34, where it may not be, it may be something else, and therefore it's not leprosy. You can pronounce him clean. Verse 38, the skin of the body, specifically white, bright spots. That's leprosy. Now be careful, because there's some other that have spots. He goes on, he says in verse 39, 40, and 41, those are not leprosy. They shall be clean. Verse 43, sore reddish white on his bald head, or on his bald forehead, as appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body. He is a leprous man. I'm sorry, Jared. You were the first one I just saw. There's others too, but he's very careful about that. Not everyone. So he makes these distinctions. All right, so what happens once someone is diagnosed by the priest to be leprous? Verse 45 and 46. Very, very sad verses. Now the leper on whom the sore is, his clothes shall be torn, his head bare, and he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. He shall be unclean. All the days he has the sore, he shall be unclean. He is unclean. He shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So think about this. You have someone, what does it say the first thing you do? Their clothes shall be? So they tear the clothes. So when you see somebody coming down the road, you immediately can see that, man, they look all disheveled. Their clothes are torn. And then they have to have their head uncovered. They have to cover their mouth and yell out, unclean, unclean. The rabbis in Jesus' time went crazy with this. They had all kinds of things. This one rabbi bragged that he would not even so much as buy an egg if there was a leper anywhere near the market. They also had rules. Find this fascinating. Guess how far apart you had to be from a leprous man? What did COVID say? That's what it was for leprosy. 6 feet. Now, Bell's going to get us, but here's the thing. Who is diagnosing who's clean and not clean? The priest. Y'all making a connection here? So the people are to yell out, unclean, unclean, and man, people would go across the street. They would avoid them. No pun intended, like the plague. They would avoid them. But what did Jesus do? Jesus had compassion on them. In fact, Jesus even did what to a leper? He touched a leper. I want you to think about the leper who has been isolated. They have to live in isolation. It's perpetual isolation until that disease goes away. And it doesn't go away usually. Once it sets in, it destroys the human being. And so they haven't had any physical contact. You remember how it was in COVID? Everybody was bumping elbows because we couldn't shake hands or hug. When we could finally hug again, wasn't it wonderful? Imagine a leper for years not having any physical contact. Jesus puts his hand on him and he says, that leper says, if you're willing, I can be clean. And what did Jesus say? I am willing. And he cleanses the leper. But I want you to notice, what did Jesus say after he cleansed the leper? Go show yourself to the priest. Do you now understand why? In fact,
In one case, I think there's 7 of them, and all of them left, but the one returned and did the more right thing.
that's right. He thanked the Lord for doing it. So the very next chapter, by the way, chapter 14, is that entire section about what the priest is supposed to do for the cleansing of the leper. So the leper goes through several things. When he comes back, number one, he needs to be examined. He needs to then give a sacrifice. He is then to be, the priest gives a sacrifice. He is then to be cleansed, washed, and then he is presented at the tabernacle. Then he gives a sacrifice, and then he is consecrated with oil and the blood of the sacrifice, and then he gives that burnt and sin sacrifice to be cleansed. So all of those lepers that Jesus cleansed, they went to the priest and they were going through that process of being cleansed. But here's where leprosy intersects with our story. Because leprosy is a picture of sin. And some of the things that we know about leprosy, it is known as the living death. And isn't that what sin is, the living death? It starts with almost nothing, just a small little spot. And then secondly, it's painless when it first begins. Thirdly, it grows slowly. And then fourth, it sometimes can go into remission, but then return. And then number 5, it numbs the senses. It then causes decay and deformity. And then number 7, eventually destroys the individual. Doesn't that sound like sin? And that's why it is used multiple times. And also why people in Jesus' day, whenever they would see a leopard, say, oh, that person must have sinned. God's not happy with them. But Jesus taught differently. All right, the bell's got us, and so that gets us up to chapter 14. We'll pick up with chapter 15 in our next. Thank you so much for your attention. We're going to take a short break and prepare for our worship.